My name's Katie Preston. I'm here, if you like, as a member of Transition Cambridge and also of Cambridge Sustainable Food. One of the things I'm interested in, hearing Francis Bucket talking about the rural feel, keeping these greenways rural in the rural areas. I think as somebody who lives in the city, it's actually very important to me, and I think a lot of the people in Cambridge, that the rural feel that we already have here in Cambridge as being so lucky and so privileged to have access to areas like Lammas Land, Sheep's Bend, Cofen and Sheep's Green, and even the controversial cycle path to Grantchester Meadows. Those are vital for people here in Cambridge. And I'm still struggling, after all the presentations this evening, to conceptualize how those can be kept rural with the proposals that are being put forward. And there is the whole environmental capacity in the city centre. This is a city centre which is set on growth, not just the city centre, but a whole city. Somebody's sometimes got to start addressing the incompatibilities between this still being a medieval city and the amount of growth and the implications of the cumulative mass of that growth that's being proposed.
Yes. Okay. So Robin Hayden from Cambridge Cycling Campaign, or CamCycle. I think we're missing the bull in the china shop here. There's plenty of public space around the core of the city. It's just that at the moment they're dominated by big metal boxes that are pretending not to be terrorists and trying not to kill people, that are parked on the road or stored on the road, and that, if we solve some problem of the environmental space within the city centre, is moving the bikes around the outside of the city centre. You know, my wife completely avoids trying to go through the city centre. She'll go much further away just so that she doesn't have to try and avoid tourists who just wander out into the street without looking. So perhaps the panel could answer the question, actually, once we have all these greenways, do we need as many cars in the city centre? And if we don't, where do we put those people?
Margaret Reynolds, architect. I'm getting a second chance here. I think that the cycle parking for the station, however much one may dislike the building, is an enormous benefit. Is there any way we can include a requirement for some kind of public cycle parking with new development, particularly in the centre, but generally?
Thank you.
So I'm Michael Goodhart of Cam Valley Forum, and I'm also a heritage watcher for Cambridge Past, Present and Future. In December last year, I wrote to the planning officer setting out why I believe the proposals for the Chisholm Trail Tunnel under Newmarket Road were potentially very dangerous. No changes have been made. If the proposals go ahead, there is a likelihood of the underpass being a magnet for antisocial and criminal behaviour and of serious risk to pedestrians.
Thank you very much. Any more hands up?
Alan Brigham. I guess I'm the elder brother of Nigel Brigham, and I would just comment as someone who's older that I used to love cycling. I've got a bad back now. I find it almost impossible to cycle around Cambridge because of the bumps in the roads. I walk or I drive. I had to drive here tonight because there's no other possible way of getting here. I like my car, it's useful, and I like to walk, and I find shared use really intimidating. Cyclists think you can get out of the way quickly, and you can't. And that's one of the things about getting older. You can't just jump out of the way. That pinch point at the top of Parker's Piece by the University Arms, crossing St Andrew Street, I think is deadly, personally. And trying to walk down Burrell's Walk, Garrett Hostel Lane, exactly the same. So I think there's real problems about shared use, certainly as it gets near the city.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Leon Turner. I'm not a part of any organisation, but I'm a very enthusiastic cyclist. I cycle many thousands of miles a year all around Cambridge. And I think that although Tom has touched on it, and a few questions have touched on it as well, we need to stop thinking about cyclists as a single homogenous group. There are many different kinds of cyclists. There are commuters in a hurry. There are commuters who are not in a hurry. There are people taking their children to school. There are sports cyclists who may be cycling at 30 miles an hour. There are people on electric bikes, which are increasingly impressive. I know of an electric bike that can easily go at 45 miles an hour, can take 120 kilograms up a 45-degree slope. Bikes are only likely to get more impressive and more powerful as we go forward. And I do think that I would like to hear Tom say a little bit more about a distinction between a commuter network and a leisure network, for example, whether that sort of thing is likely to be taken into account in the Greenways project, so that, last comment, so that different sections of the cycleways are prioritised for different sorts of user, perhaps, commuters into the centre of town, people taking their children to school, near schools, things like that. But the main point is to not treat cyclists as a single homogenous group.
My name is Paul Bearpark. I represent Waterbeach Neighbourhood Plan. From our consultations with the villagers, their main concern is transport. They're concerned about the large new town that's going to be developed north of Waterbeach. I think Simon said that the business case for the Greenways was mode shift. I suppose I'm interested to understand the extent to which cycling infrastructure can facilitate the mode shift to mitigate the issues that are likely to arise with that amount of development occurring just north of Waterbeach.
Bev Edwards, Chairman of Barton Parish Council. We had a meeting in Barton a little while ago, organised by Simon and his team. The turnout was phenomenal. It was good to see so many people interested in the Greenways plans. But the point was made by a number of people, yes, we're very interested in what's happening in our local area, but we're also interested in what's happening in Cambridge and in the other villages. So my question is there some way of sharing the whole scheme with us? You may have already thought of this and may already be a plan to do that, but could we in some way tap into the whole scheme at some stage? Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, my name's Terry McAllister. I'm on the steering committee of the Cambridge Commons, which is an equality group. I'm also interested in the environment. I used to be the Guardian energy editor. And I suppose my overall view is that there needs to be a change in terms of who has primacy on the roads of Cambridge. And at the moment, it's the car owner and the car driver. And I think that has got to change. That has got to change because of climate change and the need to decarbonise Cambridge. That's got to change for health reasons because these cars are poisoning us and our children. And it's got to change because it's completely unsustainable. The city is completely log-jammed at this moment. Never mind, still talk about 30,000 new homes being built all around and all the traffic that's going to come from that. I think there's a problem running. Tom talks about the difference between commuter cyclists and leisure cyclists. Are they compatible? I think that's one question. Two, is a cyclist and a pedestrian compatible? No, I don't honestly think it is. I love walking, I love cycling. I live next to Grantchester Meadows, but it's not possible really to walk on that path. It's a cycle path, but you can't really walk, and yet we try and do the two things. So is that map or diagram that showed separate pedestrian walkway and then a cycleway next to it, is that the sort of general presumption of what we're going to see with this Greenways, or are they going to be lumped together? But certainly I think the roads which are used by cars at the moment have got to be taken over, A, by buses, which will provide proper public transport, which we desperately need, and they could be electrified, so they could be zero carbon. And two, it'll open up huge space for cyclists to use, as they do in Amsterdam and other cities. And thirdly, if I could just, I know I've talked rather a long time, just one final point. I loved your comment, which is blindingly obvious, but I hadn't thought about it before, about using limestone for cycleways, both for its the aesthetic. It's so aesthetically pleasing, but also it's practical. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm Jill Tufnell, Secretary of the local Cambridge Ramblers group, but I'm also involved in the Local Access Forum. But I have a particular gripe as a cyclist, really. That is, when I cycle to Anglesey Abbey as a volunteer on a regular basis, or I do in the summer. I don't when the clocks have changed, because most of the route is completely impossible to see the various lumps and bumps on it and the vegetation that comes and hits you in the face. And one of my big concerns is that we have got quite a few cycleways already. We have absolutely zero money put into maintenance, and ongoing maintenance, not just in terms of the surface, but of all the completely inappropriate trees and bushes which have been planted alongside them. Whoever thought that blackthorn was a good idea by a cycleway? And I also find at the moment my attempts to get the county council, I know they have no money, but the county council to get any response whatsoever. So I spend several days in the summer cutting back vegetation on various routes. They're not wide enough at the present for the current amount of cyclists on them. The vegetation is appropriate, the surfaces are terrible, and yet we're told that there's going to be somehow wonderful maintenance in future. Well, let's have some maintenance on what we've got now as well as in the future.
Thank you very much. Wendy.
Just picking up on that maintenance thing, just a quick query on that do the people who design some of our cycleways have the PFI contract for maintenance? Just a query, no? I thought Skanska had anyway. But the question I wanted to put to the panel was, picking up on some of the comments from Terry and others, was why not raise the bar for Cambridge? Why not go for the target of making Cambridge and the villages the greenest city and villages in the country, and the healthiest, green and health. So we bring in all the objectives together, dealing with air, infrastructure, getting people modal shift. Just make the target as being about health, because it's creating a healthy community.
Thank you, Rod, and then.
Rod Cantrell, I'm a ward councillor here in Newnham. Firstly, I think the concept of the Greenways, I think, is fantastic. I think the opportunity we have in terms of a potential modal shift could be amazing. If you look in London, I cycle in London, and I have to say that the volume of cyclists in London in the last 5 years, since I've started cycling, because of the superhighways, has increased materially. Now, what I don't think London has done, though, is address the other road users, as in cars, and reduce the volume of cars in London in general. And I think that's really what we should be aiming for, to reduce the volume of cars in Cambridge. I have some specific questions, though. One is, to what extent has the project looked at destinations where people are going to, work destinations, and to what extent have they looked at those work destinations, the trends in terms of movement of those work destinations? The university is moving to the west. We all know that at the moment 4,000 odd people work on the West Cambridge site. It will be somewhere in the region of 15,000 to 20,000 when it's fully built out based on the current master plan. So to what extent are we future-proofing these spokes coming into a hub in a way that protects those work locations? And then very specifically, in relation to somewhere like Sheep's Green, I think that is where we really do need to think about the different types of cyclists. Because my experience of Sheep's Green is that very few people actually cycle that route into the city to work. What you tend to find, they are leisure cyclists coming from Newnham to actually shop or so forth. And actually, the quality of Sheep's Green is the fact that people take the courtesy to stop at the bridges to allow people to come backwards and forwards. In a world where we are going helter-skelter in terms of the pace of life, to actually have that courtesy against another human being, I think is fantastic in a city like ours. So I would be devastated to see any change of that very delicate environment that we have at that part of the city. And there are lots of options to actually change the way in which people cycle into the centre of town such that you don't have to destroy that special environment. Final point is that to what extent have we thought about the link between the spokes? So, for example, going north, if you take the Barton Greenway route, a route which would go north to link into the West Cambridge site is something which I think is desperately needed to provide a quality off-road route rather than along Grange Road to enable people who come in from outside the city to access that important employment area.
Thank you. And also links towards the biomedical park. Yeah, in the south, yeah. Edward.
Edward Lee, Smarter Cambridge Transport. One of the things that I think we need to be thinking about is actually to tie the Greenways into something else that you're championing, Francis, which is the rural travel hubs. We need to be thinking about how we can facilitate people to cycle to travel hubs, which at the moment is primarily train stations, so Waterbeach, Foxton, places like that, but also in the future, either bus stations or light rail stations or AVRT stations or whatever it might be. But the idea that we, in order to create hubs that allow rapid transfer into the city, we've got to have a relatively wide catchment area. We can't have buses that are winding through all the back streets of the villages in order to pick everybody up from their doorstep. So I think we need to be thinking about how at the moment we've just got radial routes into the city, and we need to be thinking about how you access those radial routes from the villages.
Thanks, Edward.
Hello. Can I just expand a bit on the business of leaving the ends to disseminate into the middle of the city? I totally support what's been talked about the city. If we could get the cars off the roads and the parking off the roads, then the cyclists could be disseminated into the smaller roads as they get to the city and not have huge commuter cycle routes through our green spaces. If they can be then kept for the more slower cycling around. I've had this enormous experience on Midsummer Common of the increase in commuter cyclists with the opening of the new commuter routes with the new bridge, and it's caused a lot of problems. It's led to, of course, an increase in the size of the paths, which is fine, but if we get more, it will lead to another increase. And if you can disseminate the cycles into the smaller roads to go onto the road system, keeping the cars off them, I think we could diffuse a lot of those issues. I also think, while you're about it, I would love to see a survey of the villages about how many people would be using these. And I think it would be very helpful to inform our discussions if we knew how many commuters would be using these. I thoroughly support it. It's a really good scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other? Yes, please.
Daniel Thomas, West Cambridge Active Travel Group. So several people have talked about segregated cycle ways and pedestrian paths, and I think that's really important if we're to achieve high throughput without having people having really poor experience. You need to have, if there's going to be more than 100 people an hour or something on a route, then you need to segregate it. Otherwise, people are going to be colliding with each other, and it's not going to be a good quality route. But I think the greenways are really important, and particularly going out further even than we currently have planned, because I know that people who want to cycle in from places like Papworth and can't because there's no good route for doing it. It would be faster if they cycled than if they went in the car. But if they went in the car, they cycle, they have to go along the road with all the high-speed cars. I mean, there were even people who were cycling into Cambridge from St Neots when there's no good route at all, and it's 17 miles. But it's still just as fast as driving because of all the traffic. But our vision should be to go really out a long way.
Thank you. Yep.
My name's Gareth. I've got no particular hat on today, but I'm variously part of the Cambridge Green Party and Transition Cambridge as well. I think the points about segregated cycleways are very important. However, context is really key. I think with some of the routes proposed, they're being proposed over what is now rural bridleways that are used by walkers. I think it's important not to ruin the feel of those if at all possible. It seems to me, looking at least the Haslingfield and Barton proposals, that there are better routes that exist already, for example, through Cantaloupe Farm. Again, it depends what you're doing with those routes. If they're recreational routes, then you have a different set of issues. I just would like to finish on a point of agreement with Francis Burkitt in terms of lighting and feel. I think it's important not to have lighting over these. I think it's important to keep the rural feel, both for us as humans as an aesthetic, but also in terms of wildlife and not interfering with insects and ecosystems, etc.
Yeah.
Hello, yes, I'm Tanya Elliott, ex-FeCRA, and now just myself. I'm a walker, principally, because I used to cycle, but I'm much too afraid to cycle now, and nothing will persuade me to do that. Love walking. This is just a few illustrations I've put here of, to pick up on what Graham was saying, that this is actually the famous Grantchester walk, and it used to be a walk. And if I did cycle when I was younger, I would lift my bicycle over the kissing gates and carry on. However, I walk now. I think we manage perfectly well with this. Yes, it needs resurfacing. But we walkers, sometimes cyclists, we make way. And it's very nice. It's to pick up on that idea of making way at bridges. We move a little bit. We greet each other. This is mostly, I think, leisure more than commuting, I think. Does anybody use it for commuting? The Grantchester walk? No. He does. To school. Okay, well that's fine. I mean, personally, I think the Grantchester Meadows should be sacrosanct. They are a rural atmosphere, definitely. Picking up on the point about greenery getting in the way, it doesn't. It's pretty much well tended, I think. Right, so this is actually a walk that I took the other day with my husband. We then actually proceeded across towards the telescopes. We call it the telescope walk. And we cross the M11, etc. And then we get to a bridge, which you may know. And you cross the bridge and you look to the left, and that's towards Haslingfield. In fact, it's nice and green. Don't let's tarmac it. Don't let's even put limestone on it, please. Let's just leave it green for walkers and horses and so on. And I think if you've got a mountain bike, this is a real good challenge, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Actually, I've gone the wrong order. This was the second one. This is looking back from that bridge towards Cambridge, if you like, or towards Grantchester, and it's just so pretty, just as it is. Let's leave it. Finally, that's my husband walking off. He's not abandoning me, but he's just walking west, as you can see, across, I think it's Trumpington Farm land. And again, this is a green pathway. It's so nice to have the sward under your feet. So there's just a little bit. Okay, the other point I wanted to make was on the stud lights. When the stud lights went in across Lammas Land, they're okay, but they are rather intrusive. If you're actually walking, they're quite dazzling, funnily enough. So I believe when I spoke to you, Graham, you said something about a different colour or different... Yeah. I'll stop in a minute. Yeah.
Yes, you can keep your night vision better if you use red lights rather than white lights. And it might be possible for you to lower the intensity. And the important thing is just to be able to see where the edge of the path is. And keeping it dark otherwise would seem to me to be a good thing.
Okay, thanks. Time for a few more questions, if anybody, or points, yeah? Before you do, I'll just say, as an electric bike user for health reasons, there is a limit of 15.5 miles an hour, And if you delimit your bike, you're guilty of a serious offence.
That is very interesting. I didn't know that, but I do see many people guilty of serious offences on a daily basis, in which case... Right. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. It's a very, very brief point to follow up on the concerns about lighting. I'm very, very sympathetic to worries about light pollution, and I would also like to see urban cycleways free of lights. But I do think it's important to recognise that if there's no lighting at all, then it will reduce the number of users, certainly in the evenings over dark winter months. Apart from anything else, the complete absence of lighting leads to a dangerous arms race in cycle lighting. Some cycle lights are unbelievably bright, and if you've ever cycled towards somebody whose lights are like a full beam car headlight, then it's much more dangerous than cycling in the dark. It's completely dazzling. It's a real problem. So the darker it is, the brighter the lights. You need to take it into account.
Thank you. Did you?
Margaret Reynolds again. Has anyone heard of PIR being used, for sensors being used so that it lights up as people pass and then goes out?
Yes, okay. Somebody who hasn't spoken yet, then I'll come back to you.
John Bucock, Barton. Just a thought. You have classification of motorways, A roads and B roads. Would you consider cycle paths as being A if they're for commuters and B if they're for leisure?
So I've got 2 extra points. One is on lighting. I don't want street lights next to a cycleway in the countryside. But where you are near cars which have bright lights or buses that are travelling past at high speed, those solar studs are a lifesaver, literally, because you know where the edge of the road is, even when you've been dazzled by somebody who can't be bothered to turn their headlights off from full beam. The second one is the segregated cycleways thing. Tom showed a picture of Coton Path which had a curb. There are other solutions, like having a cycleway, having a line of trees, and then having a footway. And that works really well in places like the Netherlands. And I think we should be trying to think about other solutions rather than the urban ones like we have on Coton Path.
Sorry, just to follow up on that in a way. Yes, I mean, but the Netherlands has a different architecture and cityscape in the first instance. I've cycled in the Netherlands. I have cycled in the Netherlands, so I do remember and recognise. It depends which bit of the Greenway you're thinking about, the bits that come in from the rural villages or the bits that are coming in through the existing spaces of Cambridge. Right, okay, but then you get to the city and you then hit both the city in all its manifestations and our very, very rural city in all its manifestations. And I think this is where you get to impossible pinch points and impossible conflicts. And the other thing that I really wanted to say, that apart from the fact that I'm a constant cyclist, we use cycling as a practical means of getting about. It's also the fact that these rural parts of Cambridge are vital for the mental health of all of us. We live in a city which is increasingly busy, increasingly crowded and chaotic. And to be able to get out into these rural areas quickly and easily, either to walk or to cycle or just to push a child in a pram, is absolutely important. And we cannot have these spaces made into these superhighways. And I don't think there's room for the superhighway aspect and the rural aspect in these limited spaces.
Thank you very much.
Flintworth, British Horse Society. I am getting quite concerned that I am hearing you saying that you don't feel that you can share your cycling aspirations with the original users of bridleways. If you are saying that, be careful what you wish for, because, no, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the cyclists. Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. I ride a bike as well, but you're saying that you feel that you need segregation from the original users of these routes, because part of these greenways do go on bridleways, and it was only in 1968, I would remind you, by an amendment to the Countryside Act, that cyclists actually got to use the bridleways. Prior to that, they were not users of it. So just be careful what you wish for.
Thank you very much. No, sorry, we've got other people.
Thank you. Charles Crawford of LDA Design. A couple of observations quickly based on the conversation and my own reflections on the city. I think there are different issues in the rural areas and the urban areas. One of the really distinctive and valued qualities of the city is the proximity of the countryside and the way the river corridor, for example, runs into the city with a really rural character. All of those rural areas, as we've heard people say, we must protect that character. But it can be done by good design. There may be compromises. There needs to be a recognition that it's not a one-size-fits-all. The best solution in one location might not be the best solution in another location. So I think it's just really important to have that flexibility. But good design can deal with these things. Once you get into the heart of the city, I think you've got actually bigger challenges. The pinch points people have talked about, Garrett Hostel Lane, the top of Parker's Piece, the conflicts between cyclists and pedestrians and vehicles, they need a much broader kind of multidisciplinary, multi-departmental within the council's approach to really think quite strategically about how we're going to address those things, join things up wherever it can be joined up, and balance the needs of all the different users.
Thanks. So last question, then we'll go to the panel.
Hello, Penny Heath, part of Cambridge Past, Present and Future Heritage Watch. And I suppose it's a question to the panel. All these questions relate to teamwork, collaborative teamwork, including landscape designers. Does the budget for Greenways include a couple of landscape designers like the wonderful Tom Turner in that presentation we've just heard?
Okay, we'll thank you very much, everybody from the floor. We'll now go back to each of the panelists, and we'll do it in reverse order of speaking. So, over to you.
Thank you. Sure. I think the first thing that I found very striking is that I haven't had any answer to the key question that I raised, is what is the overall impact of all these 12 individual projects? I do feel it's absolutely vital that we start to look at what the anticipated traffic generation is going to be, how that is going to be catered for, and I hope very much that the Greenways project will really engage with us fully before too long, because it's all very well creating lovely routes into the centre. If we haven't worked out what the implications are, we've got major problems. I was involved with the Cambridge Historic Core appraisal. We pedestrianised Peace Hill, major streetscape improvements. Guess what? They're now cluttered up with bikes. It is a nightmare trying to find somewhere to park your bike at the moment, let alone with all the projected growth. It does seem to me that a key issue here that has got to be addressed very soon is how you deal with the overall growth and then work back in terms of what the implications are on the particular routes. And I do feel there are major issues with Cofen, Sheep's Green, and route capacity at the city end of that, major issues with the Comberton route as well, and major issues also, we haven't touched on it, with Horningsea, bearing in mind the routes coming in there and the use of the towpath and the whole nature of the spaces on that side. And I would love to see a further level of analysis carried out before anything further comes forward.
And the next one, I think, was Francis.
Just to pick up on a few things, I'm very keen on horses, actually. I mean, on Granchester Meadows, we always say the cows are absolutely so lovely, but the most important thing about Granchester Meadows is the cow pats. I mean, that's what really reminds you that you're in the countryside. So I'm very keen on cows, and I'm very keen on horses. Secondly, I completely agree with you, Ed, but I think we need to complete our analysis of the value and the purpose of a rural travel hub and the concept. I mean, at the moment, we've just got to start somewhere. You know, the high volume is 12 radial routes coming in, but I'm absolutely convinced in the district we need spokes and hubs and everything like that, and interconnect all our villages as well. Not, I think was a point over here, putting tarmac down bridleways and existing footpaths, but thinking more imaginatively about perhaps the other side of a hedge or something like that. I think the other two real more points. I mean, if you just look around, our average age this evening is towards the sort of elevated end of the spectrum. I've got 3 children that, you know, they wouldn't dream of owning a car or having a car. They are cyclists, they are walkers. That generation uses Uber much more. They're much more familiar with that. I listened to a very interesting Radio 4 program where they say actually cars in the 1960s and 1970s represented freedom. Actually, to a child, they actually represent a burden now. You've got to tax it, maintain it, park it, find somewhere to go. And actually, this leads on to my final point that I think, I mean, I am essentially anti-car. Of course, there are people who need cars, and we must free up the roads for people who cars. I was at breakfast in Oxford. Oxford felt completely different to Cambridge. Very empty of cars this morning in Oxford compared to Cambridge. I work in London, the City of London. The City Corporation has banned all cars from the most crucial central junction in the City of London outside Bank. It was desperately unpopular move. Lewis knows about unpopular moves, whereas we had to face PCCPs. We tried to reduce the number of cars in this town last year, and we got a massive bad reaction. We're just going to have to go a bit slower. We're going to have to put the alternatives in first, better public transport. You know, you can close Bank Junction because there is Bank Tube Station underneath. So it's the message about having alternatives as well. We will get there. I'm sure we will get there. We will not get there overnight. You'll have to bear with us. We are trying to pace the carrots and the sticks and get there eventually. But I'm absolutely convinced that the future is far fewer cars on our streets, reclaiming them, partly reclaiming them in buses for people who can't walk and cycle, many more cycles. We'll free up road space so that we can have more cycles and more people just, frankly, to do for those who are mobile, old-fashioned walking around this lovely place.
Thank you. It's quite a lot of questions here. Going through them. Very, very good questions. I think I'll start with Paul Bearpark's question about Waterbeach and facilitating mode shift. Yes, I do believe that the Greenways program done right can facilitate mode shift. I know that the business case does depend on that as well, but it's also important because it gets people out into the countryside and gets people, you know, able to appreciate the countryside up front, and not just on the weekends or special days, but being able to see it every day, which some of us do have are fortunate enough to experience. You know, when I moved to Cambridge, one of the things you know about it is it's a place where you can go cycling through the meadows, and as I showed a picture of, with the cows and on the horses. And that is something very special and really a selling point of the city. And it would be great to extend that so that more people can enjoy. So in terms of mode shift, Waterbeach is only 4 miles away. It's absolutely within range of cycling, and if there was a good link, people would definitely use it. The other aspects people touched upon, things like segregation. The cycle campaign, of course, wants to have separate spaces so people walking have their own space from people cycling. That's absolutely the case. Now, there is also the question, though, once you're out in the countryside, is that really necessary? That's overkill. That's urban. And I think that those conversations need to be had about what makes sense for each context. There's a lot of talk about lighting as well. It's the same kind of issue. Personally, you know, I like astronomy. I look in the night sky. I don't like light pollution. On the other hand, I also have rather poor eyesight. So even coming here from the West Cambridge site, I'm always worried about running into curbs and stuff like that. And I've done it on several occasions. So it's something you have to just balance very carefully. And social safety. Somebody asked, for example, would the Chisholm Trail Tunnel become an unsafe place? Well, no, not if a lot of people are using it. And that's really what the key to safety is that Jane Jacobs actually said, eyes on the street, or eyes on the path. And that's really what the key is. We need to make sure that these routes are attractive and people use them at pretty much most times of day and hopefully well into the evening when it's dark out in the winter. To move out into more rural areas, we talked about, we are sharing, in some cases, spaces with other users, and we need to make sure that we're very sensitive to that. The bridleway network is very important. The footway network is very important. We don't want to trample on that. I think once we're on the countryside, it's all about creating new connections, really, for everybody. And connections between villages, connections to Cambridge. I'm sure every scheme will have its own, particular characteristics. Hopefully, we can come to an agreement about surfaces and whether we have a nice grassy verge alongside and lots of trees and a certain type of walking surface, a certain type of riding surface, a certain type of cycling surface. Those are all issues that will need to be discussed that can't generalize about them. I just would like to say that I really do hope that the Greenways network is inclusive so that people in mobility scooters can use it and people on adapted electric bikes, which are really, really great. Some of the photos I showed, by the way, of the older couple cycling, those are in the Netherlands, and that was miles and miles and miles away from any settlement. But there they were out there because they had electric bikes and they didn't have any problem getting around. And I think that's really wonderful, and we could learn a lot from just across the channel. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Lewis.
Thanks. I've gained a lot, so I think there's an awful lot of points that I'm not going to have time to respond to, but that doesn't mean I haven't absorbed. So first, I do take the point about the sensitivity of certain areas, and I mentioned that in my opener, that Sheep's Green in that area is a good example. So the character and design does need to match the nature and the standard and quality of some of those environments. I do like also the idea of A and B routes. I think there is clearly some routes which won't be able to carry people as sort of through fast cycling. And that does open up Jill Tufnell's point that maintenance is a key issue, because a lot of the A route is still roads, albeit roads that are better structured, that have less parking on them and that have greater clear cycle lanes. So I don't think we get away from some of the investment here being in actually on-road cycle lanes. My next point would be Rod's point, really, that there does need to be some look at orbitals, and I would prefer us to look at areas rather than just to put in straight spokes without looking at those areas. I've mentioned the issue of car parking. I do think this interfaces with residents parking and trying to get a reduction in cars on some of the roads that have been shown. I remain committed to seeking at an early juncture alternative measures to reduce the number of cars coming in at peak times. Thank you.
Someone told me that building cycle routes was going to be much more simple than anything else, but it's certainly not true. No, thank you. I think the thing is that the whole point of this evening is to try and get a lot of these points out in the open so that we know what we're dealing with, and we may not have all the answers straight away, but we can start to deal with them. So. First of all, I'd like to just clarify one thing I said earlier about delivery vehicles in the Greenways. There is a project which I've worked on before, which is around cycle logistics, where cargo bikes are actually being used as a good alternative to 7.5-ton and 18-ton trucks in city centres. So I wouldn't rule out the use of cargo bikes as delivery vehicles, as long as they're in an appropriate place and we can manage that. So I just wanted to clarify that point. So where shall I start? The question of limestone surfacing. I don't rule it out, but I would say that the towpath on the riverside heading north towards Waterbeach is a Breeden gravel surface, which is a limestone-based surface. And I tried cycling along it 3 days ago, and I got absolutely covered in white mud. And So there is a puddling problem. I don't know whether it's the surface that's used specifically there, but it's something we can investigate. But it is an issue, whereas that is something which, if you have a hard surface, you can handle the drainage, the runoff a lot more simply. So it's a concern I have, something I probably need to do some work on. Maintenance, the question of maintenance. Maintenance is one of the main work streams for this project. So I think that for each of the routes that we're looking at, we need a plan for maintenance. Part of that is to look at some kind of commuted some future maintenance to pay the guys that do the cyclical maintenance, the hedge cutting, that kind of thing. But also I think we should have a plan for each route which enables local communities, local organisations, volunteer groups, and even some of the large employers who are actually quite keen to have their workforce go out and do some community work. If we have a plan which means that they can get involved in that in a managed way, they can go out to a local route and cut back or side out the edges of these cycle paths at the right time of year, that can't be a bad thing. Where else shall I go to? Looking through my notes. I take the point about shared use and the idea that cyclists can be intimidating. I think it's, we're looking for what's the best solution to that. How, okay, we talk about segregation between users. How do we do that? What's the best way? We've seen different examples, but personally, I don't know what the best solution is to that, and it perhaps is a two-tier network. It could be, different levels of surfacing, that kind of thing. But I think probably the answer is that each of these routes is actually quite different, and also where you're further out in the rural area, it's a different solution to when you come into the city. So. Again, this is why we're doing the pre-consultation for each route, and then we're going to come up with proposals, and then we'll consult on those. So we've got 2 bites of the cherry, and hopefully at the end we'll have something that people really like and will use. I think the final point about landscape architects. There is room within the budget, but I would also say that we're working with landscape architects at the City Council who are already employed, so there's a resource there. I think we're going to look at our landscape architects, but it does, if we're employing a landscape architect, we have to go through the proper procurement procedures, and so these things take time and have to follow the proper procedure. So.
Thanks. Great, thank you very much for that. Now, Tom, some final reflections.
Thank you very much to Wendy again for inviting me. I've learned such a lot from listening to all the questions, which is the chief reward of lecturing. I can respond 10 points. Firstly to 2 from the panel. With regard to Bank Junction, it was the decision to pedestrianise it came in response to a cyclist death there. I think she was a Japanese cyclist, and to one of those protests like appeared on my video. It's organised by the Stop Killing Cyclists campaign by a local, he was a theatre director. Secondly, with regard to Breed and Gravel is a quarried project, product. The difference with Stabilise is that it's got a hydraulic lime binder in it, and so it sets a bit like concrete. It's a slow setting binder. It's completely different, though, to Breed and Gravel. Now, your points. So far as re-medievalising the city goes, do it. Corbusier sent a whole generation of architects and engineers astray. He castigated what he called the way of the pack donkey. We love the way of the pack donkey. Bring it back. Secondly, Jane Jacobs, as I mentioned, what she called for is the attrition of motor cars by cities. And so the aim of this is to make it, every journey, faster on a bicycle than it is by car. That's a fantastic incentive. With regard to conflicts between the users, I recall a series what we had about 20 years ago in Greenwich Park. They were called Dog Days, and the good ladies, they were all ladies, they womaned each of the gates, and when somebody came in with a dog, at that time they all used to defecate in the park, they said, excuse me, would you mind, here's a polythene bag. I mean, if your dog, it stopped almost immediately. You can educate users of open space. And you could do that on the cycle paths. You could have like a highway code for the use of the greenways and educate people in good manners. Tell them what the good manners is, and they'll probably do it. Oh, sorry, I better answer you as well. With regard, I wasn't incredibly rude about the Grantchester route. I think it's a wonderful route. I just think that the bitumen spoils it slightly, that's all. Next point, also from public parks, that in America, they're almost all maintained by volunteers. And it's spreading through gardens open to the public and other public spaces. And so, how do you maintain them? Yes. I do some guerrilla gardening myself, actually. Greenwich Council don't know about it. No ornamental plants, as you might imagine. Electric bikes, they're dangerous. I've cycled in China, and there's a lot of them. This was 10 more years ago. They're scary. They travel so much faster, you just don't know what's going to hit you. Now, on the question of origin and destination planning, it's an extraordinary thing that it's the fundamental principle of transport engineering. But when transport engineers turn their attention to cycle paths, they ignore it. They look for the line of least resistance, the route that nobody else is using, and try to put... You haven't done it in Cambridge. That's why I think it's such a great project that you've got. Then, for cycleway design, there's no panacea. It's not should all cycleways be shared, or should all of them be separate. The users are all different, as Leon said. And so what you need is a contextualized design responding to the characteristics of each landscape. It's a sophisticated project. It's not like the American interstate highway system where you get some lads to work out a design and then you roll it out. So finally, finishing where I began, which is thinking about the Bible. I thought that I was traveling in coming to Cambridge from hell to heaven. But what I discovered was that it's purgatory. Purgatory in the strict Roman Catholic sense of a place where you wait, not knowing whether you're going to go to heaven or to hell. It depends on good behavior, good management, and good design. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Francis would like just a little interjection, and then to Wendy.
So I begged 10 or 15 seconds as a closing remark as chair of the Greater Cambridge Partnership. It's quite clear from the sentiment in the room how keen we all are on greenways, and that is absolutely coming through. What I want you to do, though, is spare a thought for the poor chap who's got to deliver them, which is Simon, and pay tribute to Simon, Susan and Charlie, who are in the team. What we've got to do is help the three of them. It's a hell of a responsibility, Simon, you, Susan and Charlie have got. It's wonderful that you've taken it on. It's not an overnight job. It's going to be very difficult, very, very difficult for them to navigate all of our competing views. So all I would say is to pay tribute to the three of them, and particularly Simon, and we should mention Mike Davies as well, who's done some amazing work, but we must help and support them in their endeavours, because they are ultimately doing it for our benefit. So to them.
And thank FeCRA for organising such an impressive discussion. Thank you.
So they got their thanks in before you did, so here you go.
Well, I think it's been an absolutely great evening, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all the questions and the talk and the discussion. And so I'd like to say a big thank you to all of you, and especially to our speakers, and to Steve for facilitating and chairing. And I'd particularly like to thank Lewis and Francis for joining us tonight, because I know they've got meetings tomorrow and lots of homework and probably papers to read. And we hope this event will be part of a process which will contribute to shaping key principles, and that the open discussion and interaction between groups and individuals we've seen tonight will continue, and that we'll all be able to work together, as Francis said, to help support Simon and make the Greenways the best they can be, a model for other countries as well as the UK. And I'd like to go back to my comment previously. Let's set the bar high, and with this project, aim to put Cambridge on the map and its villages, and make them the greenest and healthiest in the UK. And I'd like to take up the point that Charles Crawford said earlier, that a lot of these issues go back to quality of design. And why not, this is off the top of my head, why not, Cambridge alumni, and lots of people who've loved Cambridge in the past, not just alumni, have dug deep in their pockets previously for other big projects for university. This is about keeping the character of Cambridge and making it really special. I think a lot of people would be prepared to support something like the Greenways project, and if you wanted to make it a sort of a bigger project and engage business. This is about life sciences. Isn't life sciences one of Cambridge's biggest businesses? Isn't the knowledge industry one of Cambridge's biggest businesses? Well, let's unite all that together, and let's get Simon the team that he needs. Thanks very much.